That says week 12. Here we are. We come to the end. Usually at the end of term at school, we could bring our games in, but we won't do that tonight. We will consider this last. Um, but God questions Job now. We've looked at Job's questions, but now it's going to be God's turn. In Job 31, verse 35, in the second part of the verse, Job says, "Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser write out the charges against me." Now, that's not necessarily a question. So we phrase this as a challenge that Job has made. And when we get to chapter 38 and verse 2, the Lord interrupts Elihu and says, "Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them." And it's Job, of course, that he's talking to. So quite a turn up for the books. Job wanted to plead his case before God. And as we've gone through this session, we've seen many places where he's asked this question: where is God? Why won't he answer me? Let me put my case before him. In chapter 13 and verse 15, he states, "I'm going to argue my case with him." In verse 18 of the same chapter, "I have prepared my case. I will be proved innocent." Verse 22, "Now summon me and I will answer." Or, "Let me speak to you and you reply," in verse 24. And on it goes. There's a couple of more passages there, but there are many more we can think of as well. So how interesting that really what Job is saying in each of these things is, if only God were here. He'd say to his friends, if only God were here, he'd tell you. He'd tell you that I'm innocent and I would be listened to. Now, the funny thing is, his friends all asked, if only God were here. And then he will put you in your place, Job. Job would have to agree with us, and his hypocrisy would be revealed if only God were here to talk. So both sides wanted God to appear, to settle the argument, and answer the big question that we even ask today: why? Elihu came along. The other friends had given 3 speeches each, and now Elihu comes along claiming inspiration as though he's God's spokesman himself to put everyone right and answer all these questions on behalf of God. So it seems that in all these speeches, in all the things that have been put forward, everything that could be said from the point of view of human wisdom has been said. All the bases have been covered with these repeated speeches, the repeated arguments. We can lift things out of what the friends had said and agree with them, but we know, because of the situation there in chapter 1, that it is misaligned. It is not in context with what's happening, and so therefore wasn't helpful. All of them had asked for God to appear and put the other party right. And now comes the whirlwind out of which God will speak. Now it's God's turn, and he says, I'm going to ask the questions now, and you need to answer me. First thing we should consider is what God does not say in chapters 38 through to chapters 42. Here we are, we've been brought to this point, and now God appears, and at last we're going to get the answer. But as we read these chapters, we see something quite unexpected. God doesn't say any of the things that we want to know. The problem that's been discussed all along, God doesn't say anything about it. Not one word is spoken about the problem that's been under consideration for all this time. It doesn't mention the meaning of suffering. And this is what Job wanted to understand. Why this suffering? His friends had their answer, but Job didn't come down on their side and didn't reveal anything that would be useful to Job. He didn't point out anything of the conversation that he'd had with Satan. Now, Job, I don't want you to worry about the way it's been, because actually I had this conversation with Satan and this is how it arose. There was nothing of that. Nothing is said of it at all. He never made mention of Job's dream of life after death by saying, Job, like we so often do, it's bad now, but we've got something to look forward to. Something better is coming. There's no hope offered for Job's dream of his life after death. It doesn't speak of a mediator. Job had asked for a mediator, someone to speak on his behalf. We know that we have a mediator, but God doesn't say anything about it here to Job. Um, he asks about a redeemer, or states, I know that my redeemer lives, but God doesn't confirm it. It doesn't say to Job, you're quite right, you do have a redeemer that lives. He reveals no deep secret which will unravel the mystery of what's been happening to Job. He doesn't agree with any arguments that have been said. He doesn't say, well done for how insightful this comment is. There is absolutely nothing about it. So what does God do? Well, he starts to talk about the inanimate world, the non-living world, as it were. And he asks, what holds up the world? Well, any suggestions? What does hold up the world? There are suggestions of an elephant standing on it, or is it a turtle? A turtle standing on a turtle's back and a turtle's back, and so on. There's a man by the name of Atlas who has the world on his shoulders, but what's he standing on? There's nothing about that. So what does hold up the world? Who decided how big the world would be? I don't know if I've ever wondered that, but why exactly is the Earth the diameter or circumference that it is? And I don't know the answer, and I know Job didn't give an answer. Who determined where the sea shall stop and the land begin? We see terrible storms, and we see how the tsunami, where the sea just comes in, but who tells it to stay where it is? There's a colossal amount of water, and yet it stops at the beach, at the shore. Can you cause the day to stop and the night to begin? I don't know if it's the same way you are, but it seemed to get quite dark tonight quickly. And it seems that that's what's going to happen now as we get into winter. Well, I don't like that. What can I do to make the light stay a bit longer? Absolutely nothing. Can you make thunder or lightning? People might try to do these things, but we can't do it with the same force and ferocity that we have in our weather systems. Can you cause the wind to blow in any direction you desire? Well, I wish we could. I've got a flimsy greenhouse with plastic sheets, and it's, well, not now because I picked them all up, but when I came home, it was all over the garden. If I could have redirected the wind to blow away from the greenhouse, I'd be saved that trouble, but we can't do it. Can you bring dew to the earth? Can you bring frost? Can you change the stars in the sky or rearrange the constellations? Do you know where the snow is kept or how much it's worth? Incredible questions, and there's no answer. I don't know, and I'm sure you don't, and Job certainly doesn't. So then what about the animal world? God has something to say about the animal kingdom. Do you understand how the animals of the wilderness regulate their lives? What about hibernation? We're coming into winter and some animals are going to hibernate. How do they know? How does it work? How are they kept alive? Can you feed the lion and the raven? Well, yeah, I can throw bread out to the ravens, and in the zoo we've got lions we can feed. But can you do that for all of them? Who looks after all of them and gives them their food? Do you know the mountain goats' breeding habits? Can you point out where the wild donkey lives? Did you dress the peacock with his beautiful feathers? I mean, they're incredibly beautiful, aren't they? But who put them there? Who dressed him like that? Do you regulate the life of the ostrich and the stork? Do you give the warhorse his great strength? Do the hawk and the eagle fly at your command? Well, only the other week we went and saw some people performing with birds, swinging the meat and the food around and controlling it. But can you do that for all of them? Certainly not. There are some we can tame and we can train, but not all of them. So he said all that, but the real question is, what about the moral world? What about the morality of what's taking place? where Job does not deserve to have happened to him what has happened. The Lord hasn't touched upon that. He's spoken about the inanimate world, his creation, and how it ticks along, the animal kingdom, his creation, and how they have their habits and their intuition to do certain things, their instincts. But he doesn't touch upon his control of the moral world at all, which is the real cause of Job's problem. It's almost like say, hold on, God. Why are you telling me all this? That's not the point. But the point is, it is the point. Job had to understand just how great his creator is. And God doesn't talk of his control of the moral world. He doesn't say one word about the problem of suffering or retribution or of chastisement and discipline. He doesn't even speak of suffering for righteousness' sake. The Lord only speaks of his supernatural perfection that is revealed in his creation, that the seasons come and go, that day and night comes and goes, that the planets move in the way that they do, that the animals behave in the way that they do. Everything perfectly fits together, and God has done that. So he speaks of his creation and his care of it. It indicates that he is exalted above all the creatures that he has created. He speaks of his great power and of his infinite wisdom. So perhaps there are some lessons here which will help us solve the problem of suffering. Because God is exalted far above the powers of nature in his might and in his wisdom, so he's also exalted above this moral world in which we live. But he controls and he rules that as well. The creator and the provider is also the redeemer, and he does not have to give an account to any of his creatures. God isn't just giving a lesson on natural history to Job, he's giving him an insight into how great he is, that he is the creator and that we are his creatures. And that's the basis on which we need to begin. So Job replies to God in verses 40 to 45, and we dealt with this in one of our sessions. Behold, I'm of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but I'll proceed no further. He's using his right to remain silent. He has figured out that compared to all of this that God has spoken about, that he himself is insignificant in comparison to it. Previously, he spoke against God, but he won't do that now. Now he sees how great God is, there's perhaps a little bit of fear in his mind, but he doesn't really humble himself. He's just not going to answer. He's not going to say. In fact, God says, you've got to answer me. And Job said, I'm going to keep quiet. He doesn't really confess God's greatness. He just says, I'm really small compared to you. He doesn't confess his sin. Remember all along, the point that he's made is, I've not sinned. You three that are talking about this need to show me what my sin is. And if God was here, he would certainly tell you that I haven't sinned. So he doesn't confess. He's not really changed yet, or isn't ready to change just yet. So God gives Job another message. He speaks to him again, and in it we find Job's true sin. His reply had been purely negative and far from repentant. He's ready to keep silent before God, but as yet it doesn't seem he's ready to submit his stubborn will to God and to God's control. The pivotal message is found in chapter 40 and verse 8, where God says, will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? This is a catastrophic statement, really, for Job, isn't it? Are you going to say that I'm wrong just to prove yourself right. I don't know if you've ever met anybody like that, but there are some people who you just cannot speak to because of that. They would rather say black was white than admit that they'd been wrong. And God's saying to Job, are you going to do that to me? By insisting on his own righteousness, we find Job's sin. He made accusations against the justice and the goodness of God. And this is because he hadn't completely let go of his old theology. He believed the same as the men did, that if you do wrong, then something terrible is going to happen to you. But this thought was tested because Job knew he'd not done anything really massively bad for this massively bad thing to happen to him. But when our theology is wrong, we get God wrong. If our view of God is incorrect, we get God wrong, and we attribute things to God that we shouldn't attribute to him. And we make out that God is perhaps not that good, or a loving God that is going to do these bad things can't be that loving. So God has pointed out to Job his own greatness and proved it through the things that he's created that Job can't answer. And so God is the one who's right. We must have got it wrong if we don't really fully understand what God is trying to tell us. So if Job took God's place and God asked Job if he is equal with him, does he have an arm as strong as God's? Can Job thunder with his voice? So the Lord offers Job the reins of the world, and in this way, Job can demonstrate that he can rule the world better than God and correct all of God's mistakes. I think there was a film, can't remember the name, I think Jim Carrey was in it, where he was given the opportunity to take God's place and he couldn't cope with it. Or Job has got to dress himself with divine power, first of all, be clothed with majesty and glory, and then Job himself can sit in judgment. If he knows what God knows, then he can judge fairly. We can't do that. We're told to judge not, because the judgment we give is the way in which we're going to be judged. God himself can judge fairly. Now, if Job wants to take his place, he's got to be a fair judge. He will be put in a position to punish the wicked. But who are the wicked? Who decides who the wicked are? He can destroy the godless. He can humble the proud. And he's got to do all of this whilst respecting each person, not picking and choosing one over the other. Everyone has to be treated equally. And before he does any of this, he's got to judge himself. Now, all through the book, really, he has been doing that, but he's been claiming he has not sinned. And it seems that that isn't the case. He must test his power on two animals. God gives him this challenge. Let's get the two biggest animals we know about, and you can test yourself with them. Behemoth and Leviathan are the ones that are mentioned, and some suggest that these are mythical creatures. They could be dinosaurs that are now extinct. I've read one commentator who believes that one of them is a hippopotamus. There's all sorts of ideas. But let's say these are just the most powerful animals that were certainly known to Job at that time. We have the largest land animal and the largest sea animal. We're not going to take one of the small ones. We need the largest that there is. And in verse 19, let him who made him bring forth his sword. Who can win hand-to-hand combat with them? Man is powerless against these. Now, the point is, if God could bring order out of the chaos of the world as he created it, he can certainly bring a life of order out of what Job considered to be chaos. The old legend seems to be that these creatures became the picture of chaos. And the world before God created it was in chaos and it's pictured by the ancient people as these two particular animals. But God himself brought order out of the land and the sea. The chaos of Genesis 1 and verse 2 has now been brought together and order has been given to it. So that's just legend, the way that people think about it. But these greatest of animals, if Job can control them, then he's the one who can bring calm out of the chaos or order out of the disorder. And if God can do that, which he can, surely Job should trust him to bring order out of his chaotic life, as Job sees it. So from all this, the Lord draws his conclusions. He says, who is he that dares to place himself before God and speak of judging God? Can this be done by someone who cannot even call animals to judgment? So by pointing out all of these things in creation that are beyond Job's control, but are certainly controlled by God, we have to understand, therefore, that in every aspect of our life, God can be in control of it, and he doesn't have to give us an answer. Even godliness is a gift of the Lord. It's not something we do by ourselves. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 and following, where he talks about adding to our knowledge and adding to godliness and all these other things. It is a gift from God. We mustn't think of ourselves more highly than we ought, as though we're doing God a favour by being the wonderful Christians that we are. God gives the gift of a mediator. We need a mediator because we sin. And it's even God who gives him. Everything under heaven is mine, says God. And that means even our mediator is provided by God. God doesn't have to give an account of what he is doing to us. We've got it the wrong way round. You see, the Lord is God. He is sovereign. And this is the point that God is trying to drive home to Job. So as a result of all of this, Job repents. He says, I know that you can do anything and no one can stop you. You asked, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? It is I. And I was talking about things I knew nothing about, things far too wonderful for me. You said, listen, and I will speak. I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. I take back everything I said, and I sit in dust and ashes to show my repentance. That's quite a change around from the first answer that he gave to God. The first thing revealed by Job's answer here is his new assessment or his new understanding of God. His previous knowledge of God was mere hearsay, but now he knows it by his own experience. He knows of God's matchless glory. He knows of the way in which God cares for his creation. And even more important, he's certain of God's righteousness. Job is beginning to see not the God of popular ideas of the day, as we shouldn't look at God with the popular ideas of our day, with all its limitations and misconceptions, but see God as he really is, infinitely greater in every way than any human imagination. Job does not know all the answers, but he knows the God who has all things under his loving care. There's the old story, isn't it? I don't know how true it is, but Mrs. Einstein. A reporter once asked Mrs. Einstein, do you understand all of these theories of Albert? And she says, no, but I understand Albert. And it's kind of the attitude that we've got to have. We don't understand a lot of these things going on in our life, but we understand God, our creator. And this is the point that Job had come to in his repentance and in his confession. He is repenting not of the crimes that his friends had accused him of, but the basic sin of all people, which is rebellion against God. Job acknowledges God's wise power. God's plans are never thwarted. He always sees them through. And Job confesses to his own foolishness. He talks to himself. I shall ask and you shall instruct me. And it desires to be led deeper into God's knowledge and wisdom. There is so much more, even though he has seen God now, there is so much more yet to know about God. And so he rejoices in a deeper knowledge of God than he had before. Now he not only hears, but he sees. And this is where we want to try and get to as well, that we don't just hear about God, but we enter into a relationship with God, a relationship that we have the privilege of because of Jesus Christ and what he did on the cross. He humbles himself in dust and ashes. Before, he came to God as a prince. As he answered his friends, it's almost, how dare you talk to me as a sinner? You show me what I've done wrong. You tell me what I've done to deserve this. But now, rather than behaving like a prince, he's behaving like a pauper, someone who is poor in spirit. He's no longer a judge, but he's willing to accept the judgment of God. He was making judgments about himself. In fact, he was judging his friends as well. But now he's ready to listen to the judge. And because of that, he is ready to be restored. And again, this is the humility in which we must approach God so that we can be restored to a relationship with him. So the solution to suffering then, the point we've all been looking for and waiting for in Job. Here lies the solution of the problem of suffering. It's not that the Lord answers every question or that he tells us the why of our suffering. Sometimes we realize this is actually just a matter of pride, wanting to know why. And we want to know why because we don't think we deserve it. If I'm suffering, why am I suffering? I don't deserve this, is usually the way we're talking. And that's the way in which Job was talking. This shouldn't happen to someone like me. But the soul that's humbled, as Job was now humbled, should say, I don't know why, but I know God. While in this life there is trouble, and we know there's trouble and distress, the gift of eternal life is that we know that God will make it turn out for the good. It is not a promise for this life that everything will go swimmingly well. It is a promise that this life is temporary. It's like a mist. It will have trouble, but this is not permanent. We have a permanent state in which we are going to, where there will be no more suffering and no more tears. And this is the consistent answer throughout the Bible. The fact is established that the innocent do suffer. But it's not because of God's carelessness. It's not because there is any evil purpose. It is because it is our choice to disobey God, to rebel against him, because that is what led to suffering being in the world. Not that the person who is particularly suffering a terrible thing has done some terrible sin more than anyone else, but this terrible state in which we live is here because, generally, we have rebelled against God. So, when suffering comes, and this is a difficult statement really, when suffering comes, it's a demonstration of God's wisdom and power. How can that possibly be? The Bible presents suffering not merely as a consequence of living in a fallen world, but as a tool that's used by God to refine and instruct his people. As we suffer, as we live through suffering, as it causes us to ask these deep questions, we come to understand a little bit more about God. We seem to have more of an insight into the world and what's happening in the world. Job suffers terrible trials, but he's a righteous man. He endures immense suffering, but he hasn't done anything that we can see personally to deserve it. He lost his wealth, his health, and his family, but through his trials, Job seeks to understand more about what God is doing. He questions God, and ultimately he gains a deeper insight into God's sovereignty and into his own human limitations. In James chapter 1, verses 2 and to verse 4, believers are encouraged to consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you encounter trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Allow perseverance to finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Well, to be honest, we're still lacking an answer to the suffering, but we're not asked to find an answer to that. We're asked to still trust God anyway, to still remain faithful to him anyway. In Hebrews 12, verses 10 to 11, the writer says, our fathers disciplined us for a short time as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, so that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems enjoyable at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it yields a harvest of righteousness and peace to those who have been trained by it. And then Paul in Romans 5, verses 3 to 5, says, not only that, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God has poured out his love into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, whom he has given us. These examples illustrate how suffering can lead to wisdom and spiritual maturity. They demonstrate God's wisdom and power in the process. The process of it helps us to see God more clearly as to who he really is. So sometimes, we're told, sometimes the best answers to life's most baffling and troubling questions lie not in what God said, but in who he is. When believers recognize that truth, they begin to see that God does not just know the answers, but in fact is the answer. To know him is to know all one needs to know. The rest may come later, but is necessary for now. So as a commentator by the name of Merrill, God does not just know the answers, he is the answer. And that's the difference between trusting him and trusting a made-up philosophy or a made-up God. Job is restored. The restoration is spoken of in chapter 42, verses 7 to 16, and it's kind of Job's happily ever after. His three friends are told, go to Job and offer a sacrifice. Job will pray for you. I will hear him, but not you. Job does pray for his friends, and God restores his prosperity twofold. He didn't bear a grudge. All the pain and anguish that they caused him, he needed to forgive them. He needed to get forgiveness for them from God. He was willing to do that, and he himself was restored. It's as James said, behold, we call them blessed that endured. You have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, how that the Lord is full of pity and merciful. Notice that. The Lord is full of pity and merciful. Job is now ready to live, not by his own integrity and righteousness, but by faith in the eternal purpose of God. He had rested on his own efforts, as it were, but now he was resting on God and depending on God. And this brings about this humble spirit that we really need to have to serve him properly. Notice also Satan and Job's wife, as Parson, a commentator, said, Satan and Job's wife were prominent in the prologue as agents of evil who tried to get Job to curse God, are intentionally omitted in the epilogue. This deliberate omission emphasizes a major teaching of the book, namely that man's relationship to God is not a give and get bargain, nor a business contract of mutual benefit. God is sovereign, and we serve him because he is sovereign. Today we serve him because of the love that's been shown to us by Jesus Christ. Jesus, as we've seen, has been the answer to a lot of these things that were raised through the book. So Job is now ready to live. He can see and understand his position before God, and he will live by faith in the eternal purpose of God. The basic purpose of the book is to call on all people to accept by faith the purpose of God, even when we don't understand it, even when we don't know what's happening, even when it causes us pain and suffering. We remain faithful to God and trust in him because of who he is, not because of what he's going to do for us. That we can offer a prayer and our life will be wonderful while other people are suffering. God is God. God is sovereign, and his people, we need to act like we believe that. The appearance of Job's friends to counsel him led to controversy, to disillusionment and despair as they tried to work things out for themselves. We today have got God's word, and we must rest on that for our information, not on our clever ideas. The appearance of God led eventually to submission, to faith, and to courage. But what had to be understood was that God is sovereign. It's not our place to question him about things that are taking place and what's going on. The words of the men were unable to penetrate into the deepest darkness of what Job was suffering, the recesses of his mind with the anguish that he was feeling. It's only the word of God that brought this abiding fruit. God, remember, did not answer any of the burning questions that are debated in the book. None of them. All of those questions that were mentioned, God comes on the scene, just talks about the wonder of creation in the inanimate world, the wonder of creation in the animal world, and nothing about this moral problem of suffering. He answered the need of Job's heart. He didn't explain each phase of the battle, but he made Job more than conqueror in it. And we will face battles with our own sin, with our own ponderings about God and what he's doing, about other people suffering when we're touched by what's happening in their lives. But through it all, we've got to recognize that God is sovereign, even if we don't understand it. The book testifies, if it testifies to anything, that there's a blank space in the human heart that only Jesus can fill. Everybody's searching for something, and we know they are, because people go after all sorts of things in this life to try and make life make sense, or to give meaning to it, or to take away the pain even. But it can only really be fulfilled by God through Jesus Christ. In Revelation 21 to 22, we have some chapters that are of great encouragement to us, especially when we're suffering, as we look forward to something better. So what Revelation 21 to 22 is to us, Job 42 is to him. Not only is justice done, but it's seen to be done. The friends didn't go away with an answer as to why Job suffered, but they learned that they couldn't question God. They tried to put themselves in the place of God, and it can't be done. Until the end comes, until the curtain drops on our life, we will live with all kinds of ambiguities where we just don't know the mind of God, where we can't figure it out. We don't know what he's doing or why he's doing these things. But we must not, we dare not act as if God owes us detailed explanations. He doesn't. He is creator, and we are his creation. There are times when the godliest thing we can do is to say with Job, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. Even if this ends in death, I will trust him. That's what the apostles were called to, and all but one lost their lives because of their faith. Why? They didn't deserve that. They got the gospel out. They got people to where they could be saved, but they still died as a result. God, it seems, wants our trust more than he wants our understanding. And that's what faith is. If we knew the absolute answer to everything, there's no need for faith. But faith is what saves us and is what we need. more than anything else. So from knowing about God, Job came to know God. And at the beginning, in the introduction, all those weeks ago, if you can remember, and probably can't, I had to look it up myself. But one of the things I said was that I hope that this will bring us to a point where we're not just members of something, but we are in a relationship with our loving Creator, our loving God. That wherever we go, wherever we are, our faith will be with us. We meet with our congregation, we meet with each other for the strength that it gives us, but we need to have this deep personal faith and trust in God so that whatever happens, we'll remain faithful to Him. And may we, like Job, go from knowing about God through our studies and through the experiences that we have in life to come to know God for who He really is, our sovereign, our creator, and most of all, our mediator and our redeemer. So I'm quite aware I've not given any answers to suffering, but God didn't either. And if He's not done that, who am I to try and say anything? But I hope that the whole thing that we understand is God knows, and we just need to trust Him. We need to know God in such a way that we'll just stay faithful forever. One thing I was going to say as well, this is reflecting on suffering in our own lives and how we cope about it. But the big question, of course, is what about those children that are suffering, the innocent children where there's wars? It comes down to the same thing. It's people rebelling against God. It's not God's fault. He's done everything He can to show us what love is. He's commanded us to love our enemies. If you love your enemy, you don't bomb them, you don't shoot them, you help them. So it's a people problem. God has done everything that He can, and it's awful that these things happen, but it's because people are rebelling against God. Now, I asked Patrick early on if he would step in if I needed to go. I've got to go and get Isaac from his scouts, so please do stay on, whether you want to say a little bit more about this, or certainly he will let you know what's coming up next in the weeks ahead. So I'll have to say good night just now, and I'll check in when I'm back, but you might all be gone by then.
There's so much this subject of suffering and understanding it, and I've got to say I've long been persuaded. I thought Mark did an excellent job this evening. I've long been persuaded that if one does not accept the sovereignty of God, one cannot begin to understand the problem of suffering. Not really. And I think for us to try to explain to people who don't believe in God's sovereignty or who don't believe in God, to try to explain to them why there is suffering, I think we very soon come to a dead end. I mean, it's just we cannot understand it unless we recognize he who has created all things. So let's just run through and look at what's coming up over the next few weeks, and go ahead and share my screen here, so you should hopefully see the next round of classes. So we still have John's final session on listening to the words of the Spirit, let the Spirit speak. Coming up on Thursday, I believe he's going to be looking at just a number of other cities, including Miletus, which is a incredible site. So this is what's happening beginning a week from this evening. John, who is on board this evening, is going to be taking us through a series of sessions looking at Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. So that'll be Monday evenings at 8 o'clock. I'll be with you on Thursday evenings at 8 o'clock, and looking at following the Master. So little brief descriptions there on the slide. But if you want to go to our website, BritishBibleSchool.com, you'll find actually, I'm not sure if the information is currently up there. It will be. It will be within the next day or so, but you might have seen the poster on Instagram or Facebook already. And then looking ahead just a little further to the end of the month, Saturday, the 27th of September, John Griffiths, who is also with us this evening, as he was a few moments ago, will be speaking about King James and his Bible. So
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to that one.
jolly good. Okay, well, that's of course King James the Sixth of Scotland, first of England. John will explain everything about that, and I'm sure, and how the translation or the version, it's not really a version, is it? But that we call the authorized version came about. But look out for that. Then that's 7:30, 7:30 on Saturday, the 27th of September. And then for those who are a little more local to this neck of the woods, on the 4th and 5th of October, 25th and 26th of October, we'll be having some study weekends looking at Christian evidences. And looks like I'm going to be there with John Galloway for those sessions. So that's the first weekend and the last weekend of October. They're in Shepshed, just not terribly far from the metropolis that is Loughborough. Okay, so that's coming up
Sorry,
again.
Patrick. The KJV studies the 27th of September. Yeah.
It is, that's correct. Yeah, should be a
Uh,
Saturday.
so yeah, it is. That is a Saturday
Yeah.
at 6:30.
7:30, half past
Sorry,
seven. Go back to that
7:30.
again. There we go. Half
Right.
past seven. Okay, that's it.
Okay. Right.
Okay, so
Thank you.
one for the diary.
Yeah.
And okay, jolly good. And then finally, as Lee mentioned just a little moment ago, we're looking ahead to the first week of November. We'll be up in at Bassenthwaite in Bassenfell from the 3rd to the 7th of November for our autumn study week. We still have places available for that. So do think about coming along to that. Please do think about that. And if finances are an issue, then still get in touch with us. We'll try to work something out because we really would like to have as many there who are wanting to be there, who are interested in looking at Israel following the exile. We'll be looking at some background material that will be extremely useful of putting everything into its context, and then looking at the texts of Ezra, Nehemiah, and a number of the latter prophets. Okay. So there we go. That's sort of the end of the news bulletin, the announcements and what have you. Um, there we go. Let's go ahead and stop the sharing there. And okay, so that's what we've got coming up. More information on the website, and with a website, incidentally, which will hopefully be significantly, will hopefully be completely revamped over over the next 6 months. Anyway, we've got plans to do that, and